My name is Sarah. I had just returned to my grandfather's house in the suburbs of Asheville, North Carolina, the one place that always felt peaceful to me growing up. He passed away 3 weeks ago. At the funeral, my mother barely shed a tear. Aunt Lisa, my mom's younger sister, was too preoccupied whispering about the estate with my cousin Jake, who used to be so lazy that he wouldn't even rake the leaves when Grandpa was ill. I didn't think much of it. I believed, just like Grandpa had told me for years, that the house was mine. As I pulled into the familiar gravel driveway, I froze. The wooden sign at the gate, the one that used to say Samuel Pearson, had been replaced. Bold letters now read, Jake Thompson. My heart raced as I stepped out of the car, unsure if it was from anger or fear. I quietly opened the mailbox, hoping for something, a letter from a lawyer, a note confirming what Grandpa had said over and over. This house will be yours when I'm gone, but there was nothing, just a pizza coupon and a realtor flyer with Jake's smiling face printed clearly. I reached for the spare key under the flower pot, still there, just like always. The lock turned, but the smell inside had changed. Industrial soap overpowered the warm scent of old wood and dried herbs that Grandpa loved. The old rug had been rolled up and replaced with something beige and lifeless. Inside, cardboard boxes were stacked neatly along the hallway, labeled Grandpa's. Books, donate, decor to sell, and one small box marked Sarah, not needed. My throat tightened as I stepped into my old bedroom. It was empty. No lavender pillows, no wooden cabinet Grandpa had built with his hands. The closet held only 2 small boxes, both marked old items discard. I sat down on the edge of the bed, or rather, where my bed used to be. The mattress had been replaced. Everything was so clean it felt sterile. My hands trembled, palms damp. No one told me. No one asked if I wanted to keep anything. My memories had been boxed up and tossed aside like trash long ago. Sarah, you're here earlier than expected. That familiar voice made me spin around. My mother, Jane, appeared, perfectly made up, heels clicking on the floor like she was headed to a meeting instead of having buried her father less than a month ago. Earlier for what? I asked, voice tight. She smiled like I was overreacting. Jake moved in temporarily to help Aunt Lisa get the house ready for listing. We're finalizing paperwork with the agency. Listing? What are you talking about? This is Grandpa's house. It's mine. He told me so. Well, you know, your grandfather wasn't great with paperwork. He didn't leave anything official. And considering how emotional you've been, I didn't think you were in the right state of mind to handle all of this. I stood up fast. Are you serious? You sold his house without telling me? I never signed anything. Jane calmly adjusted a crooked picture frame on the wall, as if handling routine business. The house is part of the family trust. I'm the acting trustee. Your signature isn't required. And Sarah, you've always been sensitive. You should focus on healing. Lisa and I will take care of the rest. Take care of the rest? I repeated, like a shadow of myself. They made all the decisions while I was still standing beside Grandpa's grave. Everything happened so fast, as if they were just waiting for him to take his last breath so they could begin the liquidation. Jane walked into the kitchen, leaving me alone in the cold hallway. I moved toward Grandpa's study, the place where he read, where he wrote me handwritten letters every holiday. My hand touched the old oak desk. It was still there, but the drawer was locked. I gently traced the faded engraving in the corner. SP, short for Samuel and Sarah Pearson. Something stirred sharply in my chest. You promised, I whispered, hand flat on the desk. You said I would be the one to keep this house. Outside, the sunset cast deep red across the yard where Grandpa once planted wild daisies. I stood there for a long time, feeling like I had just stepped into a place I knew, stripped of its soul. I left the house before nightfall, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because the cold scent of disinfectant inside made me feel like a stranger who had accidentally stepped into someone else's memories. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind spun with questions. Why, Jake? Why did they do it behind my back? And most of all, how did they pull it off? The next morning, I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee and opened the old leather briefcase Grandpa had given me back in college, where I kept all his letters, document copies, and an old photocopy of the will he had shown me when I turned 27. He had said, in case they try anything sneaky, keep your own copy. I pulled it out and read every line carefully. It clearly stated, any decisions regarding the property at 1145 Juniper Lane shall only be valid with the signature of Sarah Pearson and the presence of 2 lawful witnesses. My heart raced. That clause couldn't be ignored. But how had they sold the house, anyway? I opened my email and scrolled through my inbox. Near the bottom was an email from Stonemount Properties sent 10 days ago. The subject line read, Final Signing Caldwell Estate Escrow Packet. I had never opened it. I clicked it. The attachment opened. A sales contract, property condition. disclosure, and a signature page with my name signed on it. Or rather, something that looked exactly like my signature. I zoomed in. The swirl of the S, the final loop of the Y. It was a perfect replica of the way I used to sign back in high school. But I had never signed that contract. I scrolled down to the date of signing, April 14th. I froze. On April 14th, I was attending the annual conference of the National Archives Association in Minneapolis. I had spent 4 days at the Holiday Grand Hotel, joining workshops, giving a talk, and even took a photo with the keynote speaker, still saved in my internal email. I typed Minneapolis into my inbox search. Dozens of results popped up. Flight tickets, hotel reservation, dinner receipts, panel invitations. Every piece confirmed the truth. I wasn't even in North Carolina the day they claimed I signed. My hands were shaking when I called Rachel, my closest colleague at the university library. She was the lead coordinator for the Minneapolis conference. "Sarah, is everything okay?" she asked. I didn't waste time. "Rachel, I need something." A letter confirming I was present and gave my presentation on April 14th. "Can you help? This is serious. I think I've been conned out of my house." Without hesitation, Rachel replied, "Give me 15 minutes. I'll email you a PDF and send a hard copy via FedEx." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you. You just saved my life." After the call, I sat frozen in my chair. My pulse still hadn't slowed. I forced myself to breathe, then remembered something. Last year, my mom had asked me to help recover her iCloud account after forgetting the password. During that process, I had synced her old iPad to my laptop to reload our family photos. That iPad was still in the nightstand drawer. I rushed over and powered it on. The screen lit up after a few seconds. I opened the Messages app. Dozens of conversations appeared. I scrolled past a few recent ones, then stopped. There it was. A thread between my mother and Aunt Lisa, just days after Grandpa's funeral. "Aunt Sarah won't fight back. She's always easy to manage. She can't handle conflict," Lisa wrote. "Jane, let Jake take the title. He's persuasive. If Sarah protests, we'll just say she's too emotional to think straight." I covered my mouth. My throat went dry. The chill I felt wasn't from the weather. It was from the truth. They knew I was gentle. They relied on my silence to write me out of my own story. I screenshotted each message, emailed them to myself, and backed them up to an external drive. One thought pulsed through my mind loud and clear. They picked the wrong person to push aside, and I was going to show them. Silence does not mean powerless. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I knew there was no room for hesitation today. I needed someone sharp enough to read between the lines, tough enough to stand up against an entire family working in unison to manipulate me. I typed "Asheville estate litigation attorney" into the search engine. Within minutes, one name kept popping up in reviews: Elaine Rutledge, specializing in trust fraud and property disputes. People called her the scalpel in a velvet box. I called her office, not expecting much, but the assistant had a brisk, confident tone. "This is about forged documents, correct?" I hesitated. "Possibly forged signatures, and misused trust authority. Miss Rutledge can see you at 2 p.m. today. Bring everything: letters, documents, screenshots, and any digital evidence." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. When I arrived at Rutledge and Hartman, I carried a thick file folder, an external hard drive, and printed emails. The office was inside an old red brick building wrapped in ivy. Inside, it smelled like aged wood and fresh coffee, a quiet kind of authority in the air. Elaine Rutledge entered shortly after. Around her early 50s. She wore a charcoal-tailored suit, steel gray hair pulled neatly back, and her eyes scanned me as if she already understood the whole story. "I am Sarah Pearson," I said, standing to shake her hand. "Have a seat, Sarah. I hear you've got something I should see." I opened the folder and placed everything on the table: the copy of the will, the forged property sale contract, the confirmation letter from the Minneapolis conference, private messages between my mother and Aunt Lisa, and the email from the realtor's office. Elaine said nothing for 15 minutes. She flipped through the pages, made notes in black ink, and raised her eyebrows at a few points. Finally, she put the pen down. "You realize you're sitting on a legal grenade, right?" I exhaled. "I'm not trying to cause chaos. I just want fairness." "Fairness doesn't find you, Sarah. You have to drag it out from under layers of forged signatures, trust manipulation, and what they call family concern." Elaine turned to the will. "This is the key clause." She pointed near the bottom where it read, "No real estate at 1145 Juniper Lane shall be sold, transferred, or reassigned under any form of trust or guardianship without the in-person and clearly documented original signature of Sarah Pearson, witnessed by 2 legal parties." I stared at the sentence, my lips trembling. Grandpa had told me that I didn't think he'd written it so clearly. He wasn't naive. He knew they would try. Elaine closed the folder. We'll file for an emergency injunction to freeze all transactions and notify the buyer of potential property fraud. Could I lose? I asked quietly. She looked up. They forged your signature. They sold the house illegally. That's criminal, not civil. If the realtor knew and helped, they're complicit. If they didn't, we'll sue your family. I nodded, hands clenched. Elaine continued, I'll draft the injunction and a legal notice to the buyer within 24 hours. You'll need to sign an affidavit stating you weren't in the state the day the contract was signed. I pulled out printed flight tickets and a photo of me speaking at the conference from my purse. I've got pictures, I said. And I can request the event video from the organizers. She nodded. Even better. You're building a case strong enough not just to halt the transfer, but to trigger criminal accountability. I stood. I don't want anyone going to jail. I just want back what my grandfather left me. Elaine gave a thin smile. Sometimes, to reclaim what's rightfully yours, you have to make others face consequences they never thought would come. As I left her office, I felt lighter, not because it was over, but because for the first time in this long silence, someone stood beside me. And this time, I wasn't going in alone. A few blocks away, the office of Stonemount Properties was still open. I looked into the glass, catching my own reflection. Calm, steady, no longer bowing my head. I dialed Elaine. Miss Rutledge, I'm ready to sign anything you need. Good. Tomorrow we begin. And Sarah, if they think you're still the quiet one, they picked the wrong person. That night, I returned to my grandfather's house. No knocking, no warning. Jane and Jake might have already cleared some things out, but I knew one thing. For sure. They hadn't had time to tear everything apart. I didn't turn on the lights. Using the soft glow of my phone flashlight, I made my way down the hallway into the living room. In the dim light, the photo frame on the cabinet was still where it had always been, a picture of me, Grandpa, and our dog, Max. The three of us were standing in front of his flower garden, smiling like the rest of the world didn't matter. I picked up the frame. The back felt thicker than usual. I flipped it over and started checking each edge. Something loosened when I pulled back. The cardboard backing. A soft click. The fastener popped out. Taped to the back was a small brass key held in place with silver duct tape. Next to it was a faded handwritten note, "Keep this safe, SP." I held my breath. That abbreviation, Sarah Pearson, wasn't random. I knew something was waiting. I searched the whole ground floor with the key. Every familiar drawer was unlocked. The file cabinet was empty. But in Grandpa's study, my flashlight landed on the old rug near the fireplace. One corner was slightly off, revealing a section of wood trim that looked just a shade different. I knelt down and pulled back the rug. A floorboard about the length of my forearm came into view. In the center was a faint carving, a small triangle with an S inside. I pressed gently. It shifted. I slipped my fingernail into the edge and lifted. Beneath was a rectangular metal box, dusty, with a lock the exact size of the key in my hand. I slid the key in. It turned easily and popped open. Inside was a USB drive, a carefully folded handwritten letter, and a cream-colored envelope labeled, "To Mr. Harold Ellis, only if Sarah asks." My heart raced. Ellis, the old neighbor who used to be Grandpa's best friend. He taught me how to bake sourdough bread. He still lived 2 houses down from Grandpa's. I stuffed everything into my bag, sealed the floorboard, pulled the rug back into place, and left in silence. It felt like I just unearthed something buried not just in dust and wood, but in fear. The next morning, I stood on Mr. Ellis's porch. The little craftsman-style house looked just as I remembered, gray stone bricks, a steep, shingled roof. Christmas lights were still up, even though May was already halfway gone. Before I could knock, the door swung open. "Sarah Pearson," Mr. Ellis said, squinting at me. "I knew you'd come." I nearly cried at those words. He let me in. The house still smelled like cookies and wood polish. On the dining table sat an old cassette player, a worn photograph I'd never seen, and a letter with Grandpa's handwriting. "If Sarah comes, play this tape. We made a promise last fall," Mr. Ellis said, pouring tea into 2 porcelain cups. I knew Jane and Lisa wouldn't leave things alone. I opened the letter from my bag and handed it to him. He nodded at the handwriting. "Then it's time." He placed the tape into the player and pressed play. A raspy but steady voice came through. "Grandpa's, if you're hearing this, Sarah, then I suppose you've seen what they've done to the house. I'm sorry I didn't say it to your face, but I couldn't let anyone know you were the one I chose. Angela always saw property as leverage. Lisa's sneakier, but she's no different. I've watched them strip the value from our legacy, brick by brick. But you, Sarah, you saw what they never could. Memories aren't for sale." The tape paused briefly, then continued. "Under the staircase, where I used to hide candy every Halloween, there's another secret compartment. But I knew they'd find it eventually. That's why I left the rest with Ellis. I trust that if needed, you'll know when it's time to take back what's yours. The tape ended. No music, no dramatic chords, just the clunk of the cassette. And silence. Mr. Ellis handed me a thick envelope. Inside were scans of the original will, photos of my grandfather signing it at the lawyer's office, and a witness affidavit. I looked at him. Why did you keep these all this time? He gave a wistful smile. Because your grandfather once told me, if they ever try to bury Sarah, make sure she knows she didn't grow from empty ground. I hugged him. No words could express my gratitude. No words could describe what I felt in that moment. I left Mr. Ellis's house with the USB, the original letter, the tape recording, and the envelope of evidence. Feeling like I carried a torch just passed into my hands, I returned to my grandfather's house early the next morning, this time making no effort to hide my presence. My mother's and Jake's cars were already parked out front. The trunk was open, and a few boxes labeled keepsakes pack before May 30th Saturday right on the steps like a quiet declaration. They were wrapping up the final phase of their looting. I didn't say hello as I walked in. The living room lights were on, and the smell of floor cleaner still lingered. My mother, wearing white gloves, was carefully placing small wooden pieces into foam boxes like she was prepping for an auction showroom. You're early, she said without looking up. I walked past her, my eyes stopping at a painting hanging on the wall, Laurel Hill at Sunset, one of his favorites. It had been displayed in his study for over 3 decades. But something was off. I stepped closer. The colors were too fresh, the composition too clean. I reached out and touched the surface. Why does this painting look like it was just printed? I asked. Jake walked out from the kitchen holding an inventory notebook. It was restored. The old one was decaying. Couldn't keep it intact. You should be thankful we spent money preserving it. Really? I stepped closer and touched the surface. Restored using synthetic material. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo, and sent it to Elaine. A minute later, she replied with a contact. An art appraiser who used to work for the regional museum. I turned to my mother. Where's the original? She gently set down a wooden box on the floor and said nothing. Jake, I changed my tone, you're helping them swap out the real paintings and selling them privately, aren't you? No disclosures, no public valuation. What the hell are you talking about? He scoffed. These are family heirlooms. No one's selling anything. I pulled the USB drive with Grandpa's voice recordings from my pocket. I've heard everything. He knew what you were going to do, and he left more than just a warning. I ignored Jake's pale expression and climbed up to the attic, the only part of the house that hadn't been professionally packed. The wooden stairs creaked, the air thick with dust. I remembered a patch of wall near the brick chimney that had been loose since I was little. It was where Grandpa used to hide cookies when Grandma was still alive. I traced the boards one by one until I found the one with a cross-shaped scratch. I flicked it with my keychain. The wood popped out, revealing an old metal safe with no keyhole, just a worn-out numeric keypad. I tried a few numbers. His birthday, no luck. His wedding date, still wrong. Then I remembered. On my college graduation, he gave me a pen engraved with the words, "You are my greatest legacy." 607, I typed. 0607, click. The safe door opened. Inside was a neatly arranged compartment with envelopes, sealed letters, and 3 small paintings wrapped in dark velvet. I pulled one out and carefully unwrapped it. It was the original Laurel Hill at Sunset. With that frantic brush stroke in the lower left corner. No doubt about it. The bottom of the safe was a bundle of documents stamped in red. The official appraisal of the 3 paintings. Total estimated value of over $2.2 million based on last year's auction market. Alongside it was a confirmation letter from the insurance company. All items were listed as non-transferable assets without verified ownership. I froze. They didn't just want the house. They wanted everything inside and were secretly swapping out the real paintings to sell them to private collectors, dodging taxes, avoiding public valuation, and most importantly, cutting me out entirely. I picked up my phone, returned to the attic, and filmed close-ups of each painting, the document codes, and the open safe. I sent everything to Elaine with a message, not just will fraud, this is money laundering and art fraud. Less than 10 minutes later, she replied, excellent. I just upgraded the lawsuit. Get ready for the final round, Sarah. I wrapped everything back up, locked the safe, and left the attic with a weightless step. In a house being stripped bare by my own family, I had just reclaimed the true soul of my grandfather. They thought swapping out a few frames would erase history, but they forgot. I grew up in this house, and I remember every detail they never even bothered to see. Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 p.m., I heard the tires crunching across the gravel driveway. I stood by the living room window, hands gripping my teacup, eyes tracking every movement outside. A sleek black SUV came to a smooth stop at the steps. The door swung open, and my mother, Jane, stepped out. Her silk dress was perfectly pressed, lips painted blood red. Behind her came a tall man in a gray suit, hair slicked back to perfection. Her private attorney. I wasn't surprised. Elaine had warned me they wouldn't go quietly. My mother wasn't that type. She would show up with her usual weapons, power, legal threats, and a fake smile like this was some kind of casual family reunion. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Sarah," my mother said in a calm, unnervingly smooth voice. "We need to clear a few things up." "Oh, so do I," I replied, stepping back and motioning for them to come in. They entered with confidence, but I noticed the attorney's eyes scanning the room, like he was appraising everything in sight. My mother placed a thick stack of documents on the coffee table right beside the photo frame I'd already removed the backing from to retrieve the hidden key. "This is the legal copy of the property transfer agreement, including the representative authority signed by the trust supervisor, which happens to be me," she said, her hand gliding over the folder like it was a sheet of music she'd played 100 times. I didn't sit. I simply pulled a small USB from my pocket, plugged it into the laptop I'd set on the table, and turned the screen toward them. Displayed were photos, original paintings, certificate numbers, insurance documents, the attic safe. Each image, crisped down to the specks of dust. "This is proof you and Jake swapped out the original artwork and planned to sell them privately to avoid taxes and hide unlisted assets from the estate." My mother's face paled slightly. Her lawyer furrowed his brow. "Those are serious accusations, Sarah. Do you have anything besides photos?" I smiled slightly. "I have the original will, the unaltered version. It includes a special clause about the ownership of this house. It cannot be transferred without my direct signature and the presence of 2 legal witnesses." The lawyer shifted, opened his briefcase, but I wasn't done. "I also have written proof that I wasn't even in the state when the contract you're holding was supposedly signed." I pulled out printed flight tickets and a photo of me speaking at the conference from my purse. "I've got pictures," I said. "And I can request the event video from the organizers." She nodded. "Even better. You're building a case strong enough not just to halt the transfer, but to trigger criminal accountability." I stood. "I don't want anyone going to jail. I just want back what my grandfather left me." Elaine gave a thin smile. "Sometimes, to reclaim what's rightfully yours, you have to make others face consequences they never thought would come." As I left her office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, not because the battle was over, but because for the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. I wasn't just a silent bystander anymore. I was taking back control. The next afternoon, I stood by the window, watching my mother and her attorney pull up in a sleek black SUV. Their confident steps as they approached the house only fueled the fire inside me. They thought they had it all figured out, but I was ready. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Sarah," my mother said, her voice smooth and calculating. "We need to clear a few things up." "Oh, so do I," I responded, stepping aside to let them in. I watched as the lawyer's eyes quickly scanned the room, trying to assess the value of what they could still take from me. My mother placed a thick stack of documents on the coffee table. "This is the legal copy of the property transfer agreement, including the representative authority signed by the trust supervisor, which happens to be me," she said, her fingers delicately brushing over the folder, as if she were making a casual declaration rather than presenting stolen property. I didn't sit down. Instead, I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket, plugged it into the laptop I had set on the table, and turned the screen toward them. On it, I displayed a series of clear images, the photos of the original paintings, the certificate numbers, insurance documents, and images of the open attic safe where the real assets were hidden. "This is proof," I said, my voice steady, "that you and Jake swapped out the original artwork and were planning to sell them privately to avoid taxes and hide unlisted assets from the estate." My mother's face turned ashen, her eyes narrowing. The lawyer's frown deepened. "These are serious accusations, Sarah," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Do you have anything beyond photos?" I gave him a thin smile. "I have more than just photos. I have the original will, the unaltered version. It includes a clause about the ownership of this house. It cannot be transferred without my signature and 2 witnesses present." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "I also have written proof that I wasn't even in the state when the contract you're holding was supposedly signed." I pulled out my flight tickets and a photo of me speaking at the conference, which I had saved in my purse. "I have pictures," I added. "And I can request the event video from the organizers, if necessary." Elaine's presence had been unwavering, standing quietly but firmly beside me. I could feel her energy pushing me forward, reminding me that I wasn't in this alone. She glanced at my mother and her attorney. "Excellent," she said. "You're building a case strong enough to halt the transfer and trigger criminal accountability. We'll move quickly from here." I stood tall, my heart steady despite the chaos swirling around us. I don't want anyone to go to jail. I just want to get back what my grandfather left me. Elaine smiled, but it was a knowing, sharp smile. Sometimes, to reclaim what's rightfully yours, you have to make others face consequences they never thought would come. As Elaine and I walked out of the office, I felt a new kind of strength within me, a quiet confidence I had never experienced before. This was no longer just about a house. It was about reclaiming everything they tried to erase, the legacy of my grandfather, the memories, and my place in this story. The next morning, the house at 1145 Juniper Lane stood in an unusual silence. There were no more hammering sounds, no more of Jake's mocking laughter echoing from upstairs, and no more overwhelming scent of disinfectant trying to scrub away the past. I made myself a cup of coffee and waited by the living room window. A silver Lexus pulled into the driveway, and through the window, I watched as the potential buyer, Edward Monroe, stepped out of the car in a sharp gray suit, a file folder in hand. He was one of the biggest real estate investors in Asheville, and I knew from the moment he stepped onto the property that he wasn't someone who could be easily fooled. I opened the door for him before he could ring the bell. "Sarah Pearson," he said, shaking my hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. You're here to pull out of the deal, aren't you?" I nodded. "Yes, I am." Edward laid the file folder on the table. "After the evidence your attorney submitted, I had no choice. This property was listed using fraudulent paperwork and involved misrepresented assets." I sat across from him in silence as he continued. "I filed a complaint with the county prosecutor's office against your mother and Jake. They forged signatures, attempted to sell, swapped artwork, and provided false information about ownership. If I hadn't backed out in time, my firm could have been pulled into a chain of lawsuits." I looked him straight in the eye. "Do you know who they were trying to scam?" At first, he hesitated. "At first, I thought you were just a disgruntled heir, but after listening to your grandfather's recording, I realized I'd trusted the wrong people." I nodded slowly. Justice isn't something everyone has the patience to wait for, but it shows up right on time. That afternoon, while I was watering the hydrangeas on the porch, 2 police cruisers silently pulled up in front of my mother's house, just 1 block away. I knew why they were there. That evening, the local news aired a blurry clip, Jane being escorted out of the house between 2 officers, handcuffed but head held high. Her second husband, Griffin, followed behind, his face pale. They were both charged with forging legal documents, asset fraud, and conspiracy to seize inheritance, 3 criminal charges, plus a civil suit filed by Edward Monroe. Jake wasn't in the footage, he had left town the night before. Elaine told me he was trying to negotiate immunity in exchange for turning over documents and transaction records related to the fake artwork. Legally, that was cooperation, but to me, it was just another form of escape. A few days later, I received a letter from Jane's attorney. It was a plea to negotiate reduced charges, filled with desperate wording like, "Jane only acted in the best interest of the family." I folded the letter shut without reading the last line. Family isn't something you get to hide behind after stabbing trust in the back. The county court later issued a ruling. All property transactions were nullified. The artwork was classified as misappropriated estate assets and had to be returned. I was restored as the sole legal owner of the house based on the original will, physical evidence, and the sworn testimony of a third-party witness. Mr. Ellis. Edward Monroe completely withdrew from the transaction, but he didn't walk away from the fight. He became the key witness against Jane and Jake in the federal investigation into art money laundering. "I can't let people like them pollute the market," he said during a brief press statement outside the courthouse. I made no comments to the press, no lengthy statements, no bold declarations, only one sentence when asked how it felt to win. "Silence doesn't mean blindness. Sometimes it's the only way to protect the evidence." I returned home, closing the old wooden door behind me. For the first time in months, I heard the wind whispering down the hallway, familiar, almost like a memory. The house was no longer a battlefield. It had returned to where it truly belonged. Months after the final hearing, I officially regained legal ownership of the house at 1145 Juniper Lane. The American flag on the porch was washed and Rio. I replaced the nameplate at the gate with a simple hand-carved wooden sign, Pearson House, 1963. That name wasn't just my grandfather's last name. It was a reminder that this place was once built on trust and would continue to live on in memory. Many people asked why I didn't sell it. The house was big, full of complicated history, and its market value was sky high. But I knew one thing: selling was easy. Keeping it was the real work. And the real meaning wasn't in its real estate value, but in what I was about to do next with it. I started with the library. The living room was cleared, the carpet replaced, and the walls painted a soft cream color. I restored my grandfather's old bookshelf and arranged short stories, classic poetry, and history books, including those he used to read aloud to me back in second grade. I opened the room every Wednesday and Friday to seniors in the neighborhood. They'd sit by the window, sipping herbal tea, reading Dickens or Faulkner, or just sharing a quiet moment together. I converted the old dining room into an art room for kids every Tuesday afternoon. I hired a freelance artist, Jenna, to teach them how to use watercolor, charcoal, and, more importantly, how to tell stories through pictures. No grades, no pressure. We hung their art on walls, on the fridge, even on the front door. The house started breathing again with laughter. The old garden shed where Grandpa once kept gardening tools and a lawnmower was fully cleaned out. I invited a group of local college students to help install shelves, lighting, and long tables. In 2 weeks, it became a craft studio. Seniors came to teach knitting, woodwork repairs, handmade cards. Young folks shared skills like fixing wiring or drawing basic blueprints. It was a kind of intergenerational knowledge exchange, natural and unforced. The house was no longer a museum of the past. It became a bridge between then and now. A place people came not to admire, but to create new memories. One Sunday morning, as I was arranging flowers in a vase on the porch, Mr. Ellis stopped by. He wore a moss-green crewneck sweater and carried a stiff paper bag in his hand. "I brought something for you," he said, placing the bag on the small wooden table in the yard. I opened it. Inside was a small wooden plaque, hand-carved. "He remembers what matters." I was quiet for a long moment. My eyes burned. I didn't need to ask who she was, and he didn't need to explain. I chose to hang that plaque right at the entrance to the library where everyone would see it first. Below it, I placed a photo of my grandfather laughing, holding me when I was 6. The look in that picture, that's what I'd been trying to preserve all along. People started calling this place Sarah's house, but I always corrected them. It's not mine. It's for anyone who's ever been pushed aside and decided to come back to rewrite the story. A little girl named Lily, 8 years old, blonde with coin-round eyes, once said to me after art class, "Miss Sarah, this place feels like a grandpa's house in a fairy tale, but still alive." I smiled and nodded. Alive, and it'll stay that way. On summer evenings, I'd sit on the porch, reading one of my grandfather's old books. The sound of wind through the trellis, the quiet voices from the craft room out back, the scent of wood and cinnamon tea drifting from the windows somehow made me feel light in a way I hadn't since he passed. I didn't keep the house just to win a legal battle. I kept it to restore what they tried to erase, the meaning of preservation. And now, whether they come back or not, whether the names that once signed those forged documents remain buried in court files, this house will no longer be called a disputed property. It has a new name and a clear mission: to preserve what matters and help others rediscover themselves in what once seemed lost.